Recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome every Friday, Tuesday meeting, the night before Christmas. Anyhow, let's open this meeting with the third step prayer.
This is the third step.
What's the first requirement in making this thing work?
God.
I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that would help. Thy power, thy love, and thy way of life may I do thy will always. Right now we'll have an intimate night. We'll cover some, won't get too heavy, but we'll cover the design of this thing. A lot of people really miss the design of this, and I don't know if it's kind of like because we get our heads wrapped around thinking it's about the steps, right? You hear everybody when they share they're working on the steps. You ever hear that? I'm working on the steps. I'm working on this step. I'm working on that step. And that's not the design of this thing. It's kind of weird. So if you get back to the basics, it's just like anybody ever been to a meeting where they bring up the topic acceptance now?
Yeah.
So they're breaking things down over where they talk about the third step and people, they talk about, it's about turning our will and life over the care of God. You ever hear that? Step 3, I turn my will and life over the care of God. That's not what step 3 is about either, right? You kind of, if you take out certain words, you miss the meaning. Anybody ever hear the people, when they read how it works, they talk about having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps? And the result, does it change the meaning of the, right? And that's kind of like it. So when people bring up acceptance, where does that term actually come from?
Serenity prayer.
Yeah, it comes from the serenity prayer. Back when I was getting sober, and like all the different times getting sober, that's one of the most important introductions to one of probably the first prayers we learn in the fellowship of AA is the serenity prayer, right? We say it at every meeting, but it's one of the least talked about things nowadays. So we don't even use the prayer anymore. What we do is we talk about acceptance, and everybody talks about how they're able to accept everything, right? But if you kind of look at the prayer, in the prayer itself is a process. And same with step 1. You hear a lot of people, they do step 1, but step 1 is also a process of understanding, right? Because if you don't understand step 1, the way it's laid out, how well are you going to understand step 2? You're not, right? And it's kind of like, and if you don't understand step 2, how well are you going to understand step 3? And how well you're going to understand the process. So if you kind of go back to the basis of this thing, where they talk about right, the introduction of this thing is that there's a story here, right? Right in the beginning of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about the story. And by the way, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Tony. My sobriety date's April 8, 1989. And they talk about here, I have the 4th edition, but it talks about Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. So that's quite the statement when you look at it. But if you didn't kind of broaden your view on it, you think the most important part about that thing is recovered. But it's actually the story. How did they recover? What enabled them to recover from an illness that's killing me or that was killing them? And so as you start going through here, they talk about the purpose of this thing, right? And they talk about where we find the program in the preface. They talk about the first portion describing the AA recovery program. And forward to the 1st edition, they talk about here, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book, right? So I don't really understand what they're talking about, what the problem is, what the solution is, and what the course of action, but do they understand what they're talking about? That's what the basic text is about. So what I need to do is get the same information that they have in order for me to make a decision as they did, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And if I never went through this with somebody, how well would I be able to make an informed decision on what this is about and what I have to do? I wouldn't be able to. So the biggest problem in our fellowship is most people really don't do step one. They really don't do it, because if you really did step one, how motivated would you be to get into step two? You'd be very motivated to get into step two. And when you understood step two, how easy would the decision be in step three? Easy. And how well would you be able to do the process? You'd be able to have a basis of willingness to do this thing, to get through it. But if you have a clouded idea what this is about, then what happens is, as you start going through it, your mind starts thinking it's about the steps. And if it was just about the steps, then they wouldn't turn into principles in step 12, would they? It would say continue to work these steps, wouldn't it? But how many people give you the impression it's about doing the steps over and over and over again? So as soon as people say that, is one, either they forgot or they weren't shown the purpose of the steps. So if you understood the purpose of the steps, then it would make more sense that it isn't about the steps. So we're going to cover some of that information. So in the doctor's opinion, he talks about here witnessing this thing that we call Alcoholics Anonymous now, or the program of Alcoholics Anonymous working in people's lives. And who was the first person that he really got to witness this phenomena, this unexplainable event happening in people's lives like ourselves? Who was the first person he got to witness this thing? It was actually Bill, right? But he did meet Ebby when he was 12-stepping Bill. How many times did Bill, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, how many times did he go through treatment?
33.
So we see there's more to this, right? And then in the doctor's opinion, he talks about there's certain types of people that moral psychology and just don't do it, and acceptance and working on yourself don't work for, right? But a lot of them it does work for, because in his treatment center, he says, his efforts on trying to help people recreate their lives, a lot of them it does work for. But there's a certain type of people that this doesn't seem to work for, right? And he goes on to describe that these people have something a little more psychologically wrong with them than the other people that he's dealing with, right? He talked about, not only are they maladjusted and full-fledged from reality, but there's something psychologically a little different about these people than these other people. And despite everything that's ever happened to them, that they all have one thing in common. What was the one thing he noticed that they all had in common?
Craving.
Yeah, well, he called it what? What was the first symptom in alcoholism?
Allergy.
The allergy. So he gives us certain terminology, and you see that breaks back to, we have Alcoholics Anonymous, or more than 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So the first symptom he started to address was the allergy. And then he goes on to describe that these people can't safely use alcohol in any form whatsoever. Why is that? Because the allergy produces the phenomenon of craving. So it makes good sense why I drink, or these people drink different than other people. I know a lot of people who could safely drink, who are not alcoholic, who have problems. And how many people find that surprising? So there's the human element that people think that makes them alcoholic, but there's only one thing that makes you alcoholic. And what's that? The allergy. You hear people say, if I suffered from trauma, that's what makes me alcoholic. So if you didn't suffer from trauma, does that mean you wouldn't be an alcoholic? So if I was born in a different life, say if I was born in the British properties instead of downtown West Side Toronto, Lakeshore, grew up on the streets of Toronto. So I think, that's a good reason to make you thirsty, but it doesn't make you alcoholic. My sister was raised there also. She's not alcoholic. She could safely have a couple drinks, and she doesn't want to drink, which doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you can drink and you don't want to do it. That don't make sense to me, right? So when I took a drink, there was something that happened different for me than it happened for my sister. And what happened for people like us when we took a drink, not maybe the first drink, but somewhere along the line, something happened within inside of us that didn't happen within her or people like her. And what would that be? Anybody remember what alcohol used to do for you? Anybody get a new sense of freedom and happiness? Anybody find the solution to all their problems? And what's your problems? You. You took a drink and you really didn't care anymore. I don't know anybody like that here. Anybody ever take a drink and kind of found the magic in a drink? So it's not the first time you had a drink. It's the first time you felt the magic in a drink. Is there a big difference? Because we had alcohol in our family growing up all the time. Wine on the table, French background family is just part of the culture, right? Everybody as kids having beer, drinks of wine. Now that didn't make me alcoholic. So what made me alcoholic is somewhere along the line, when I took a drink, the next drink became more important than the drink I was having. I don't know anybody like that here? Somewhere along the line, I became more focused on the next drink than I did the drink I was having. How many people have that kind of weird kind of sensation happening here, right? And then when I took a drink, the promises came true. I don't know, anybody ever feel the magic in a drink? Right? And so when you had that elusive feeling of, wow, it kind of took care of everything, the next time you had a problem, what did your brain tell you?
Drink.
A drink will fix this. And it changes, I don't know, it changes me, my perception and everything. But what started happening was the phenomenon of craving. Right? And then, anybody ever experienced problems with their drinking here? Maybe. And how many people thought that was the problem, was the problems? Right? If I could just drink without consequence. Isn't that the goal? Because really, it's not the alcohol, because this thing is my soother, makes me feel better about life, and you want to take it away? What am I left with once you take the alcohol away? You're left with the problem. Who's the problem? You're left with the human condition. And how are you going to treat the human condition if you don't have treatment for it? You're left with yourself. Anybody ever try to get sober here without treatment? Well, let's put it a different way. How many people's relapsed here? And then how many people relapsed since coming to AA? Because you hear a lot of people say, I've never relapsed. Well, then why would you come to AA? If you could stop on your own, would you have come here to find out why you can't stop on your own?
No.
How many people this was on your bucket list? Check that off, junior kindergarten. Plans and designs for yourself. End up in AA. Right? You know, that wasn't a goal, right? But somewhere along the line, we became bewildered by our own existence. Anybody been bewildered here by your own existence? How many people sat with a drink in front of you wondering what's the matter with your life?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what's the matter with my life, right? But it wasn't alcohol, because that was kind of like my soother. And then when you come to AA, you find out that really what we have is an illness, right? And it consists, so if you get 12-step right away, they kind of explain the allergy. They've taken you through the book and you can diagnose yourself. And the doctor talks about even knowing you have a problem isn't enough, because there's something that keeps on happening in your thinking. This thing, he called it a desire, but this idea comes back again that I need a sense of ease and comfort. I need to find a solution to the dilemma called self, the human condition. So is the human condition the same thing as alcoholism?
No.
Two different illnesses, right? I'm now being driven by alcoholism, and my human condition is starting to deteriorate even more. My thinking starts to become a little more warped. My body's starting to take on damage. My liver, my pancreas, my life. Anybody? My life becomes more unmanageable. Why is my life becoming more unmanageable as time goes on?
Physiology.
Well, because I can't stop drinking. If you can't stop drinking, wouldn't that create an unmanageable life? So a lot of people think, oh, I didn't pay my phone bill, I didn't pay my rent, or I didn't go to work. Does that mean you're alcoholic?
No.
It means you're kind of lazy, I don't know, or immature, or you don't have the living life skills, right? Your human dilemma is causing you more problems. And a lot of us, we really don't like, I had to grow up in AA. I don't know about anybody else here, but I had to learn fundamental basics on how to function as a human being. I don't know, anybody else here? Yeah. So I had to really, it's tough going through puberty at 57. You know, the emotional deformities and all that other stuff. Like really, when you kind of look at a lot of the stuff we struggle with, is not alcoholism, is humanism, and our inability to function at a level acceptable to society, and how we process information. If you can't process information very good, how well are you going to function? How many people look forward to their alone time?
And imagine if you need to
Yeah,
translate.
so we see that the brain is running uncontrollably. And so what they see in the doctor's opinion, he talks about, we see other people's taking drinks with impunity, right? And we're like the dog sitting at the table watching its owner eat. Right? Like, I just want some of that. I don't care, right? And then we take another drink, setting the cycle in motion again. How many people set the cycle in motion again? And how often did the doctor say this keeps on happening for people like us? Over and over until what happens? An entire psychic change. So he's very specific there. Not until we hit bottom, not until we have acceptance, not until the not until clause. You ever hear that? Right? Until I do step one here. And so when they go through Bill's story, how long did Bill struggle with this thing?
A while.
A long time. So what was the changing factor in Bill's story? Well, he had God. Remember when he was talking to Ebby? He had his understanding of God. And he kind of reflected back about what his father or his grandfather in the church and the temperance he didn't, or whatever, the pledge he didn't sign. And he talked about that. And he even said to Christ, I thought was a great man, right? Closely by those who followed. Some of the things he liked and the rest he disregarded, paraphrasing. So he had an understanding. There's a lot of people who have an understanding of God, but still can't get sober. Anybody here? Right? And they address that later in We Agnostics, the three people, and we'll get to that in a second. So we see in Bill's story, the change came from what the doctor witnessed, is that Bill tapped into an inner resource that created a shift in his thinking and allowed him to experience a psychic change or spiritual experience. This doctor welcomed the idea of this movement, and he allowed Bill to start working with other patients, which is pretty wild when you think in 1934, right? And Bill was dying of alcoholism sitting at the kitchen table, right? So if you kind of look at his story here, he talks about, and this is where we get into the essence of this thing that we kind of start missing. On page 9, he talks about Ebby showing up, and there's something different about him. Then he talked about, on page 10, he talks about, I've always believed in a power greater than myself. So he acknowledges that he's always believed, but he was missing access or the experience Ebby was having. Is that not correct? So he had a belief, but his belief wasn't the same as Ebby's experience. There was something missing there, and he struggled with the idea of, he says, obviously this power didn't originate in Ebby, and there was no more power in him than there wasn't in himself at that moment. But there was something happening in Ebby that wasn't happening within himself, and he talked about right then and there, his ideas of miracles were revised, right? So they talk about when you come to AA, and you hear a lot of people who said they used to be like us, and they're no longer like us, and they're living a pretty phenomenal life, it kind of makes you look at this thing a little differently, right? That's why it doesn't say, do you understand what we have? It says, do you want what we have? Right? And what is it that we have? We have a solution to a dilemma that seems to be killing me, but you seem to be free of it and having a life far beyond anything I could ever achieve on my own. So as Bill was sitting there, he talked about on page 12. And they're sitting there for a little while and they're discussing, and what Ebby and them are doing is talking about this power, but Ebby's talking about his experience that he went through. That two members went and visited him in court and had his sentence suspended, and they kind of, what we understand is 12-stepped him, took him through a course of action, and he had this experience. At 2 months sober, what am I missing?
Okay.
Oh, you're just shaking your head, or?
I'm just shaking.
Oh, you're just shaking. It's getting heavy, eh? I thought you were arguing with. Okay. Anyway, so So he got the judge to suspend the sentence while they 12-stepped him, and that 2 months sober, he got on a plane and went and visited Bill. What was the first thing Bill noticed about him? Was there something different about it? So Ebby obviously had an experience, right? And Bill was able to see there was something different about him. What Ebby did, he came out to pass what on to Bill? What did he came? The steps or his experience? His experience of having gone through a process. So he talks about that here. After they finish talking, and he sees Bill's having a hard time with whose understanding? Ebby's understanding or his own understanding? Who's Bill's struggling with? His own conception of a power greater than themselves or Ebby's? His own. Right? So that's why in step 2 it doesn't say as you understand him. We change stuff. We get people that don't even understand step 1, and we tell them, oh, choose God as you, make up your own idea, come up with your own concept. Well, it should be, do you understand what we mean by a power greater than ourselves? And if you don't know what we mean by it, then we need to explain it to you, and then you could come up with your own conception of what we're talking about, because you want what we have. That means you need to do what we did, is it not? That means it becomes collective, right? I can't be singular going through this. I need the same experience. I'm hoping to get the same experience as who? Well, those that went through this thing, right? It's kind of like, so Bill's sitting there, and he talks about, my friend suggested, why don't you choose what seemed a novel idea? He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? But they've already explained this thing. So it's an aftermath. Choose your own conception of what we're talking about. It's already explained. He didn't start that at the beginning of the conversation. He started it after the conversation. Yes? No? Maybe? So he talked about, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountains in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. Here's the squiggly. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon what point?
Step 2.
In the reading. Upon what point?
Believing that there is a power greater than
Believing that there is a power greater than myself. Willingness. That's it, right? Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So what steps did Bill just do sitting at the kitchen table?
1 and 2.
2 and 3.
He just did steps 1, 2, and 3. How many people are having a hard time with that? And that's the same what we do in steps 1, 2, and 3. Right? Made a decision to turn our will and life over the care of God. If you take out decision out of there, does it change the whole meaning of that? A lot of people take out the word decision. Well, what's the purpose of the steps, right? So we see that Ebby took Bill through a course of action his 3rd time in treatment, and he had the same experience Ebby did. He had this relationship with a power greater than himself that he put in his own words, but it was the same experience that Ebby had. It's the same experience we all have. When they talk about that in the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, do they say some of our members or all our members? All our members. With few exceptions have tapped into what? An inner resource of strength. This thing that happens from within, right? And they our more religious members call it what? A God consciousness, but it's something that happens from within. It's an experience, right? So as we go through this, and then we've seen Bill struggled with what after his psychic change or spiritual experience? Did he still struggle with alcoholism, or did he struggle with his human dilemma? Yeah, he struggled with his human dilemma, right? That he applied these principles to, and he was able to overcome that dilemma, right? Where he was able not to return to alcohol because he had a new solution to the problem called self. He was able to put that recipe in place. Does that kind of make sense when you kind of look at it that way? It's kind of cool, because was Bill able to combat alcoholism? No. Because if it's an illness, at what part of the illness can I combat it? Never. Before or after. If it's not removed, then I'm suffering from it. If I'm suffering from it, what am I going to do? I'm going to drink again. And some of us confuse abstinence with recovery. There's a big difference between abstinence and recovery. Anybody kind of cluing into that yet? I didn't clue into it. 11 years in and out. It did not dawn on me because was armed with the facts. I didn't know the difference, right? So as we go through, there is a solution. It talks about the fellowship. It talks more about this. It talks about more of the alcoholic dilemma on page 23, 22, 23. It kind of breaks down the symptoms of alcoholism. And how many symptoms are there in alcoholism? Two. But we get told there's three, right? How many people have heard there's three symptoms in alcoholism? Mental, physical, and spiritual. Right? The spiritual part isn't a part of alcoholism. That's the human dilemma. We became spiritually sick. A lot of people think I became spiritually sick, then I became alcoholic. It's actually the other way around. Right? Because what did I start using as my solution at an early age in my alcoholism? Alcohol. So the more I depended on alcohol, the less I started depending on human or spiritual or other things. Anybody? Right? He talked about that in his story, right? People were jumping to their deaths, right? When the stock market crashed. What did Bill do? I went back to the bar. Anybody have that kind of solution here? Anybody have a problem? Go back to the bar. If you stay there long enough, the problem will go away. Kids, marriage, job. Unless it's a warrant. He'll still. So anybody ever watch their problems go away? And then what did you do? Have another drink? Anybody have all the best intentions in the world? Follow it up with a drink? It's pretty baffling, right? So they talk about on page 22 about the physical allergy. And they talk about, we know that while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years. That's pretty interesting, eh? A lot of us can stay sober for months or years given good reason. And we get feeling better, confusing getting feeling better with getting better. Huge. So alcoholism is lying, what? Dormant. Is it not? Yeah. So it's lying dormant. And what is one of the symptoms? What's the second symptom that makes it impossible for it to go away? Well, they talk about it's the insanity here on page 23. They call it the malady. They talk about these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. So they started a new conversation here, and then they get down to talking about here. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. Truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. How many people have made excuses for how many times they've relapsed or taken a drink? Because we need to tie an excuse to it. Because if there's an excuse to it, then I'm not beyond human aid. There's something I can do about it. I'll just watch out for it next time. So you hear people say, and it's subtle how it changes, but it kind of changes the whole perception on everything. You hear people say, I stay sober under any and all conditions. You ever hear people say that? Well, it kind of gives you the impression that they're the ones staying sober under any and all conditions. But if you understand alcoholism, how many people drink under any and all conditions? How many people don't need a condition? Because their condition's a condition that needs conditioning. Right? So they talk about it here. Once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. Why are they baffled? Can't stay sober. Wouldn't that be a problem? If you can't stay sober, that would be kind of a problem, wouldn't it? Because if you're able to stay sober, then it wouldn't be a problem, would it? No. Would you come here finding out why you can't stay sober? No. Then you come here, and then what do you start thinking is that you can stay sober? Right? Anybody? AA is actually designed for relapsers. How many people find that surprising?
Just that one promise.
Step one promise is kind of like, if I was able to keep me sober, then would I need to do anything else other than have a conversation with myself? And if you talk to yourself long enough, that kind of starts making you thirsty, doesn't it? Well, I have enough of that. Waiter! No. Sorry, get into that. So, there's the obsession that somehow, someday they'll beat the game. And the game they're talking about is keeping themselves sober. How many people have been obsessed with keeping themselves sober in the past? How many people made promises? How many people swore that they'd never drink again? How many people would pass a lie detector's test here before coming to AA? Loved ones. I mean, like the heartbreak that we caused, like our kids, like we're going to do it. Anybody you're sitting there and you're just kind of just bewildered. Anybody? And you mean it. You mean it. You mean it. You mean it. And you're really going to do it. And then somewhere along the line, you find yourself drinking again. Isn't that baffling? And that's what they talk about here. And then they talk about here on page 24, they break it down. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times, that's the catcher, at certain times, to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Page 24. How would you know if you're of that type? Yeah, look at your drinking history. How well have you been able to keep yourself sober based on your own experience? How many people remember the first time they said never again? I was 15. I remember the first time never again. And then my first meeting, I was 16. I never wanted to drink again. That has nothing to do with it. Step one, don't care if you want to or not. That's what places us beyond human aid. Did Bill want to drink again? No. I could laugh at the gin mills. I had what it takes. Right? This time my wife knew I meant business, and so I did. And how many times did he kept on getting loaded? Every time. And then he left treatment the second time, and he talks about what kept him sober for a while. Fear. And then he knew why he relapsed. Why did he relapse? The insidious insanity. Where did he get that information from? The doctor. So if Bill was in AA today, would his story be different? Exactly the same as a lot of us are having the same experience. We continue to relapse. I'm going to change. I'm going to do everything I mean it this time. I never want to use again. Well, that's not the question, is it? No. If you're capable of not doing it again, then you wouldn't be beyond human aid, right? So the admittance of that I'm beyond human aid and that I'm going to relapse 100% is a little different position than I'm going to keep myself sober. Who's going to be more desperate? Who's done step one? The person that thinks they're going to keep themselves sober based on their experience, or the person that knows they're going to relapse again in spite of their experience?
Second one.
Yeah, who's going to be more motivated? Second one. So when you fully do step one, it's kind of the way it's outlined. That actually motivates you, and the book talks about a lot of that stuff. Page 25 starts talking about there's this solution, about this deep, effective spiritual experience. On page 27, they talk about here these people who are beyond human aid, right? The doctor said you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never seen one single case recover where the state of mind exists to the extent that it does in you. What symptom is that? The mind of an alcoholic. What classifies somebody to have a mind of an alcoholic?
Insanity.
The insanity or the basis of that symptom is called what?
Malady.
The malady. And then they use a lot of terminology to explain that. Subtle form of insanity, plain insanity, blank spot. But it's a malady that centers where? In the mind. And so even in our recovery, where do they say our illness is? In the parking lot doing push-ups. If it's in the parking lot, just stay out of the parking lot. What happened? I went in the parking lot. But if it's in your mind, now you're in trouble, right? And they really, the best way they describe it is they talk about here on actually page 27, they call it a phenomena. Well, that's the solution. Sorry, on page 30, where am I going here with this? On page 30, that's interesting. Page 27, they talk about the one phenomena, which is the spiritual solution. And on page 37, they talk about the other phenomena. I'm a numerology kind of guy. I love numbers, man. Is that they talk about this other phenomenon, curious mental phenomena. What creates the curious mental phenomena? What symptom is that? What's a phenomenon?
Unexplainable occurrence.
So how do they explain an unexplainable occurrence?
Give illustrations.
They give us examples. The first guy was Fred, and then Jim, the guy's whiskey and the milk. And so they talk about what's the only thing that will save these people from themselves. So if you have this condition on page 37, what's your fate? You're going to continue to drink. And if you know that, if you conceded that to your innermost self as that's your fate, how well are you going to be looking for a solution? Well, yeah, if you think you're going to be okay because you've done step one, how well are you going to look for a solution? You're not really going to, because you'll be reassured that, look how well I've done the last time. See, we're the only group of people that makes sense to. We missed the point of last time. You didn't do well the last time. Welcome back. Right? A lot of us try to recapture what we thought was a success before. That's where the biggest struggle comes from, because people who think they had something before never really did step one to understand what they had wasn't sufficient enough to keep them away from that drink. Because alcoholism was lying dormant. It wasn't removed. There's a big difference between something lying dormant and something being removed. If it's removed, are you still dealing with it?
No.
If it's lying dormant, are you still dealing with it? It's just a matter of time, right? And so this is what they talk about on page 37. So as we go through here, and they talk about that may be true of certain non-alcoholic people, though drinking foolishly or heavily at the time, page 39, right, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. So it's hard to admit that our cheese and cracker are not on the same plate, eh? Like we're just not quite right? Yeah, anyways, that's a self-discovery that only you could be happy with. Okay, so, but the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Anybody have any bitter experience here?
Yep.
And what's the bitter experience? Relapse. How many people hope that was their hope, coming in to start a new life and relapse again? But if you understood step one, then you understood, like, holy shit, I'm in trouble here. Is there a solution to that dilemma? So as we go through here, they talk about, here as we go through it, we agnostics, there's only two questions, there's actually three questions, but there's two questions in diagnosing yourself as an alcoholic. What's the first question? On page 44.
Can you quit entirely?
Yeah, can I quit? What does quit mean? Not drink anymore. Is that including weekends and holidays and Christmas events? Done. Right? What do you mean weekends? You hear people say, but my birthday's coming up. Yes, you can go back to jail that day too. Don't worry about it. Right? Like, usually when you get to that point, there's nothing appealing about drinking anymore. If there's still something appealing about drinking, there's nothing, right? You need to go back in your drinking history to raise the bottom. But if you got to a place where you can't afford to drink again, anybody like that here? And you can't not drink, and you're able to keep sober for 3 or 6 or 2 months or 2 years at a time, And it's funny, those who've been able to stay, the guy who just, one of my sponsors, he had 4.5 years, relapse. He tried to get back to doing what he was doing before, relapsed again, and he just died last Thursday before. That's it. So his family experience is pretty tragic this time of year. He left his kid, the mother, the family, everybody. And they know him as a person who had been sober, and they're trying to say, well, why can't you do it again? Because he didn't understand what he was up against. If he understood what he was up against, he'd be a little more motivated. And so the second question on page 44 in regards to determining whether you're an alcoholic or not is what?
Couldn't control the amount.
Yeah, can I control the amount?
I thought I said I was going to do this much, but I did way more.
Yeah. Anybody able to control the amounts they drink? Yeah, sometimes, once in 1974. But most of the time, we don't want to really... How many people want to control and enjoy their drinking?
No.
If you're controlling it, are you enjoying it?
No.
And if you're enjoying it, are you controlling it? So how many people the goal was to drink without consequence? And why can't we drink without consequence? Because of the allergy. So that makes sense. So I can't afford to ever drink again. So they talk about... Then there's a third question in step one that a lot of people don't make reference to. What's the third question in step one?
Can you stay sober based on your own experience?
Yeah, or can I quit upon a non-spiritual basis? Can I quit upon a non-spiritual basis? And if you're at this part of the book, the answer is probably no. Right? So now there's 3 people entering we agnostics. Anybody know what the 3 types of people are that are entering we agnostics here?
Atheist, agnostic, and believers.
Yeah, there's 3 people having the same problem. The true believer, the agnostic, and the atheist. All 3 of them are having the same problem. And what are all 3 of them having the same problem with?
The belief system doesn't work for them anymore.
They're thinking in regards to the solution. They're struggling with their ideas of what they think the solution means. Remember Bill? Was he struggling?
Yeah.
He was struggling with what he thought Ebby meant by this because of his own, he went locked in his own thinking. When we heard about spiritual principles or the word God or all this other, how many people start going right into their thinking? This is where people who don't understand go, well, choose your own conception. Well, if you don't have a conception, then you're hooped, aren't you? What about the person that has no conception whatsoever? Well, make it up. Is that what step 2 says? Just make it up. And that's where the doorknob comes, a rock and all that. Like, you don't understand the basis of this thing. Because if you're using a rock, then you might need more help than we got to offer. But that's not that's not our solution. You need to understand what our solution is. And they talk about that on page, because they go to a transition here. If your mere code of morals or better philosophy, anybody know what better philosophy is? Our fellowship's filled with better philosophy. Anybody been to a discussion meeting? Yeah. Holy shit. Everybody talking at great lengths of shit. They have no idea what they're talking about. Oh, acceptance. And then you go home and you get arrested for domestic abuse. It may sound weird, but we're whacked out people. Really. We say letting go. We don't know how to let go of crap. Our letting go is don't deal with it. Is that the same thing? Anybody ever get a bill in the mail? Remember when you used to get a phone bill in the mail? Well, now I got automatic payment, but the old way is look at it. If I didn't have the money, I'd turn it over and let it go and put it in a drawer. And say acceptance. Life is getting ready, is sending me another notice. I get another notice saying, hey, you got 10 days. I ignore it because I got acceptance. I put it in the drawer, turning it over, letting it go. I'm deluding myself that I'm dealing with something, which I'm not. And life is giving me another notice. And what's the final notice? They cut off my phone. And if you're really good, you phone them and give them shit to let them know who you are. Come on. Anybody? You know there's other providers. Anybody ever do that one? Yeah. And they say, good. Go use them. But first pay us our money. Anyway, we should get that later. Go use them. So, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly your job. Your job is to come up with an idea that makes sense to you and to pursue that without doing any work. Oh, it doesn't say that, sorry. But we hear it that way, don't we? How many people sat in a meeting, haven't done shit? What are you doing? I'm looking for God. I'm coming up with my own conception of God. You're in trouble. Remember, you're some result of all your thinking of everything that made sense to you. And you want to go this alone? But we don't know that because the people who are teaching us don't know that either. Right? But what they say is, well, that's exactly what this book is about. His main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will help you solve your problem.
No.
Is that what it says?
No.
How many people hear that? I need to get God to help me solve my problem, to help me solve my problem. Well, we already established that we can't solve our problem. We need to get access to something that will solve our problem. And if it needs my help to do it, then it's not going to work. Really. But how many people think you need to be more involved than you are? And that's where the treatment infiltration comes into. I need to work on myself. I'm working on this. I'm working on that. That explains the painful look on your face. It's not about working on yourself, because if it was about working on yourself, then would you need this source or this psychic change? It would say work on yourself, wouldn't it? Just try harder. But it says if you can't fix you with you and you need something greater than you, now I'm in trouble. Where and how am I to find this thing that's going to solve my problem? Not help me solve it, solve it. That's what this book is about. So that means if I've gone through the book to this point, and I'm willing to continue along these lines and do what they did, what is the likelihood of me recovering from this illness and never drinking again?
100%. Good. Rarely ever.
Really, 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 really good. So my 11 years in and out, I got to this point and I redefined that I needed to get access to this power. Right? Where and how we find this power, that's what this book is about. So when they go through it, they tell us where our understanding of this power is. You need to understand it as we understand it. That's why it says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as who understands it? As we understand. You need our understanding. You need to get what we're offering. Don't you? If you want what we have. If you want what you have, then don't complain. But if you want what we have, then you need to do what who did?
They did.
We did. And then you need the same understanding.
Yeah.
So, but how many people would rather argue than... How many people arguing a bit? So it's a one-sided argument. You're arguing with yourself. Because you can't argue with us. Why can't you argue with us? Because you don't know what we're talking about. Anybody ever argue with somebody that you were the only one that didn't know what you're talking about? Did it stop you from arguing?
No.
And they're going, I don't know why you're arguing. We got you on video. That's not me. It is you. You're saying your name. No, but it's kind of like that argument. Like, go through this, and then you have a position to argue or debate from. If you don't go through this and know what we're talking about, then it's a one-sided argument. Was Bill having that one-sided argument? Yeah. How well was that working for him? Abby said, look, choose your own conception of what we're talking about. So when we went through this, they talk about on page 55 of where this thing is that I need to get access to. And where's this thing that they're talking about where this power resides? Deep down within. For some of us or all of us?
All of us.
Every man, woman, and child has this fundamental idea of this access to this power. It's within us. And upon research, we've seen it's always been there. So we're tapping into this thing. So as we go through this, and we get to there is a decision, And what's the decision when we look at page 63? We're going to spend a couple minutes on that. Yeah, we'll go to page 63 about this decision.
A life on itself will hardly be a success.
So there's a couple things here. They talk about, when we get to page 60, they talk about being convinced we're at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and life of the care to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? Who's going to explain that? They are. So I can understand what they fully mean by that, right? So I have a full understanding what they mean by that. And say, oh, okay, I understand why I need to do this. So from page 60 to 62, what dilemma are they talking about? The alcoholic condition or the human condition?
Extreme human condition.
Well, they're talking about the human condition, and then they say the alcoholic is an extreme example of the human condition. Why? Because we've warped our thinking and our emotional, or mentally and emotionally a little not quite right. Anybody overreact to things?
All the time.
Anybody have one-sided arguments?
Yep.
Anybody? So we're a little whacked out when it comes to the human condition. Just a little. We spend a lot of time apologizing for things that used to make sense. Oh, that's what you meant? I'm sorry. Okay, so, and there's often no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. So then they talk about here that they have a solution for the human condition. On page 63, they talk about that, their experience of having gone through this process. And then the third step, prayer, is an idea. Right? It's a summary of everything that I could hope for going through this process. Made a decision to turn our will and life over the care of God as we understood. I'm making a decision to do what? The rest of the work. To establish what? This relationship. And what's the basis of that relationship? Lack of power. Where and how was I find this power? That's exactly what this book is about. I'm making a decision to learn how to turn my will and life over the care of God as we understood Him, to get access to this power. Because lack of power is some of our dilemma or all our dilemma? All our dilemma. Does some of us need to get this power or all of us need to get this power? So whether I call it Jehovah Jireh or Jesus Christ or Buddha or frequency or great creator or creative is secondary. What I label it as is secondary. The underlying is the same for all of us. Every single one of us needs to get access to this power to create the change. How I interpret that is entirely up to me. It makes sense to me. I call it frequency. I tap into a higher frequency that allows me to connect to the universe. And anyways, it's personal to me after 30 years. And then I call it other things, but it's secondary. It's none of nobody else's business, my relationship with this power. Because what that would do would create stumbling blocks in front of other people. My job is not to create stumbling blocks. My job is to allow you to find the same power that I have in my life working in your life. How I've developed that is entirely personal, and how far I went with that to pursue that is in step 11. So when I go through this process, the confirmation of step 3 is what?
Spiritual spirits.
Well, but also is the relationship. Because a lot of times when if we kind of head over to page 85, they talk about here, I'm making a decision to find out how to have this relationship so I could turn my will and life over the care of God. Right? And then by the time I get to page 85, 84, they talk about by this time sanity will have returned. Is that not the whole purpose of the steps? Is to be restored to sanity? And that's a byproduct of my connection to what? Source. To power. So the byproduct of my relationship with a power greater than myself is connecting to this inner resource of strength. Lack of power is my dilemma. Now I've tapped into this power. Is it still my dilemma? No. Am I still powerless?
Yes.
No.
We were powerless.
We were powerless. I'm not powerless anymore. Now, Here's the catcher. Am I still afflicted with alcoholism?
Yeah.
No.
Oh.
Because if I'm still afflicted with alcoholism, what am I going to do? I'm going to drink. Right? So that's why the promises talk about if I'm willing to work for these things, right? A lot of people are under the impression by the time I get to step 10, no, it's by the time I implement step 10. But it's not implementing step 10. It's not about step 10. It's about my relationship. Step 11 says, right? What does it say, Joe?
Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out.
What's our dilemma? Lack of power. So what am I seeking now? Power. So step 10, if you kind of look at it, it says this thought brings us to step 10, page 84, which suggests we continue. That means I've already done it. I'm continuing. And then they talk about here on page 85, which is the pivoting point. You know, anybody know what the pivoting point means? I'm moving in a new direction. Before this process, who was the primary focus of my sobriety? Me. Who am I always working on? Me. What am I working on? I'm working on the steps. That means you're the one in charge of you. If you're still working on the steps, then you haven't, it's not about working on the steps. You've just deluded yourself into believing that's the exercise is working on the steps. It's not the purpose of the steps. What's the purpose of the steps is to get this relationship. Step 11 says I'm working on the relationship. It's a part of me. So on page 85 is the confirmation what this is all about. And people argue because we hear something said so many times, we believe that's true. Step 10 is the transition step to continue. The argument is if you're continuing, when these things crop up, why would they crop up? Because I'm doing amends. I'm taking care of the past. The old story wants to represent itself. I need to correct it as it's happening because I have a new way of looking at things, right? If things are still cropping up, then there's still things I need to address. Does that kind of make sense? If things are cropping up from my past, am I present?
Oh.
Right? So the whole point is getting present. So here's the good part. If you have a book, page 85, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from Him who has all knowledge and true or false? If, the biggest word in the book, if we have carefully followed directions, what's the purpose of the book? To tap us into that. Where and how am I to find His power? Well, that's the purpose of this book, is to enable us to find a power greater than ourselves that will solve our problem. Well, resources solve our problem. And the part of the solving of that is removing the problem. It doesn't exist for us anymore. What doesn't exist for us anymore? Alcoholism. It's removed through my connection with His power source. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent on that relationship. So the most important thing in my life's got to be that relationship. I'm not cured of alcoholism. What I have is a daily reprieve contingent on what? Me working the steps or me staying connected? Connected. So it's really subtle how that happens. How self could start talking to self absent of my relationship with a power greater than myself. I don't know if anybody's done that here. Anybody been in counsel with self all day? Said to myself, self, what do you think? Well, let's not bring God into it yet. I think you got to figure it out. All right. So it says, if we have carefully followed directions, where are those directions? First portion. Everything up to this point is all directions leading us to this point. Right? If we have carefully followed, we have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. To some extent, we become God conscious. We've tapped into this inner resource, this thing that lies where? Deep down in every man, woman, and child. It's a separation from our animal instinct to our spiritual instinct, whatever you want to call it, right? We've begun to develop this vital sixth sense, intuitively, sixth sense, this thing that talks to us deep down within that we all have. But we must go further. That means more action. Step 11 is the design to this whole thing. If you're working step 11, you're working all the steps. There are principles to keep you connected to who? Source. to inner resource. And when those blocks start happening, you sense there's something not right. You go through these principles to remove the blocks to get you reconnected to source. And when you're reconnected to source, the struggles seem to subside. You ever notice that? You match calamity with serenity. You're able to face life a little differently. When you're absent from source, how well do you do talking to you? You notice when you're not connected to nobody. Your life is directly proportionate to your relationship with a power greater than yourself. When life starts going south, so is your relationship gone south. But we don't think that because we start going back to working on ourselves. Anybody? I got this problem, I got that problem, I got to solve this, I got to solve that, the chatter, blah, blah, blah. Anybody have that? So step 11 says there's a connection, there's a whole form of connections that become a working part of the mind that keeps me connected to source. From the time I go to bed to the time I wake up to the time all through the day, it has me reconnected. So many times each day, reminding myself what this is about. And when I'm in trouble, go work with another human being. Go carry this message. Does that kind of make sense? It finishes off on page 88. We alcoholics are undisciplined. So we let God, not ourselves, we let God discipline us in a simple way we have just outlined. What did they just outline? Step 11. So if you're working step 10, what step are you not working? 11. If you're working 11, what are you working?
11.
You're working all the principles that keep you connected to source. Step 11 is the only 24-hour clock step that we have. It's the only steps that deal within a 24-hour clock. It's the only step. Step 10 does not connect in the 24-hour clock. If you're in constant conflict with people, places, and things, and you need to do step 10 every day, would you say there's something the matter with you spiritually? Are you more instinct-based or God-based? If you're living more step 11, how many... Does that kind of make sense? Are you in more harmony? The promises talk about my connection with source. What is this all about? Is it about the steps or is it about my relationship with source? What gets me that relationship is the steps. Once you have that relationship, it's not about the steps anymore. So second phase recovery is about my relationship with a power greater than myself. First stage recovery is your relationship with you and the steps. If you're still working the steps, you're still in first phase recovery. That was fun.
Thanks, Tony.
And this recipe will apply everywhere.
We have the worksheets for those who want to get caught up Tuesdays and Fridays. If you need extra help, there's people who are willing to take you through the work to get you connected to source. We use the book and the foundation. We close with a great suggested prayer as outlined in step 11 that cover all our principles. We use the Lord's Prayers on Tuesday only. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. And if you're working this thing, every day is Christmas, baby.